Hey there, everybody. Welcome to WP Roundtable episode 120. I'm Kyle, doing WordPress stuff here in Jackson, Michigan, and I'm pretty excited and pretty honored to have with us today Mr. Drew Jaynes. Drew Jaynes is a developer working at Affiliate WP. He's a core developer working on contributing to WordPress core actively. He's done a lot of amazing contributions that we all should thank him for many times over. He's the lead developer this year for the 5th year running, I believe, for WordCamp Denver. And he's also a co-organizer for the WordCamp US event, which is coming up in just about a month and a half. So, Drew, thanks for joining us today.
I think you meant lead organizer. And not for 5 years. No, I think I would have gone crazy after 2 or 3 of those, just the last 2 years.
Oh, just the last 2 years.
Yeah,
you've been involved.
That's enough. I think that's enough.
Yeah. All right. Well, so a few mistakes, but
no big deal.
You get the gist if you're tuning in, even if some of my data is incorrect. Drew is pretty involved in the world of WordPress, and you can't go too far without encountering Drew. He's been very, very involved in a lot of different aspects of this community, and there's just so many things, so many people, I should say, that speak very highly of Drew and are grateful for his contributions, including myself. So,
well, they obviously have no idea what they're talking
about. Well, it is true that there's a lot of people in this world who don't know what they're talking about, and maybe even so in the WordPress community. But sure. I, for one, think that those who praise Drew's accomplishments and his contributions highly maybe are not so crazy. But that's just me. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
Fair enough.
Anyway, we're going to talk a lot about Drew and everything that he is actively involved in, everything he's done, and everything he plans on doing in the future. But first, we're going to talk about our quick picks of the week real fast. So my quick pick is kind of an interesting article that I encountered that just made me go, huh, that's kind of cool. I read about Google's release of the Noto font. Did you hear about this, Drew?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of interesting. They Google came up with this new typeface. The name is Noto, N-O-T-O, and it comes from the name. The name comes from their goal, which is no more tofu, and tofu is that like square box that we see when a typeface can't be supported.
Yeah.
And so it basically is, they did some kind of unprecedented work and created typesets for over 800 languages, 100 written scripts. So the goal is basically to have every different set of characters be supported by this generic but universal typeface, which was pretty neat. And they did some cool stuff, like making the first ever representations of some sets of characters, some languages that have never existed in a digital form before. Even pulling from like
trust Google to push the limits with a font of all things.
Right. Yeah. The stone engravings that they had to refer to come up with characters in some certain cases. So I don't know. I don't know how much it affects us. But it's cool, I guess. Yeah. Google's in a position to do cool stuff. So yeah, cool. That's my quick pick. What do you got, Drew?
It's kind of a gimme, but I'm going to go with, the REST endpoints getting merged into core. I mean, can you really top that?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe tell me why that's so cool. Because
do I really have to explain to you why the REST API is so cool?
Yeah, I just haven't heard enough about it. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Nobody's talking about it,
and nobody's had conferences around nothing but the REST API either. So.
It's totally not getting enough attention.
Well, truth be told, I haven't really been active that much in the 4.7 release, so I'm kind of like watching it with a bird's eye view, the same as everyone else this release, because I've been so focused on working at Affiliate WP and doing other things that I haven't. I'm sure some people on the core team are not happy that I have not been around that much this release, but I'll try to make up for it.
I have no doubt you will. I think you've got good excuses, but again, that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good quick pick. And yeah, if anybody isn't aware, follow the latest core development, and we've got basically approval. 4.7 will include core REST API endpoints. So
Awesome.
going forward for production projects requiring REST API, you won't need to use the plugin. It'll be there. Kind of neat. Kind of neat. It's been a couple years coming.
Yeah, but it was worth the wait. I think doing it right is better than doing it quickly. WordPress doesn't move on a dime. It shouldn't move on a dime. I'm glad it didn't.
I'm totally with you.
Waited.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So at this point, we want to learn a little bit about Drew Jaynes. So if anybody's tuning in, if there's a chance that someone doesn't know your entire story, that's what we're going to dive into.
Okay.
We're going to start by talking about your background, then we're going to learn a little bit about what you do now, what's going on in your world, and where things are going. So let's start with a bit of your background story. And I like to start kind of at the beginning, at least at the beginning of your career. So back before you really got involved in WordPress and the web, you were doing things in this industry professionally. Back before your career really got started, what is it that you thought you were going to set out and do with your life?
I thought I was going to be a truck driver. I wanted to be a truck driver when I grew up.
That's awesome. You took a big step down.
But I never really could. You know, I had problems with being able to drive for long periods of time without falling asleep. So that really ended up being kind of a non-starter with the truck driving.
Yeah, that would do it.
Well, you know, growing up, my dad was a sysadmin for a large corporation here. Okay. So I grew up with computers my whole life. I mean, I should say that's more common these days, you know, to meet these kids or younger people who have grown up their entire life with computers. But like, for me, it was like my first computer was running like a DOS shell. And then, you know, 3.1, and then all the way up through, like, every time a new version of Windows came out, we got the new version of Windows. So we worked our way all the way up through, and, you know, like NT4 and Windows 2000, and of course we skipped, you know, a couple in there, but a couple that we will not mention.
Of course.
But, you know, worked all the way up, and then somehow I found myself working on a Macintosh when I was in school studying journalism in college. Suddenly I switched to Mac, and now I'm on both. I'm talking to you on my PC, but I program on my MacBook. So, wow. But yeah, I really got started, I guess, in, I don't want to call it web development. I don't know that I would consider it true web development, but maybe like when I was like 16. I was in a Yahoo Pool League online. This is back when Yahoo Pool Leagues were still cool and awesome. And I was working on a site. I don't even remember what the context was, but I was working on a site for my online pool league. And that was the first time I'd ever written like HTML or had to learn HTML or CSS or any of that kind of stuff. And I wrote this awful website to like report losses to games and things. And then I think around 2001, 2002, my first exposure to PHP was through PHP BB. I don't know, have you ever used PHP BB?
Nope.
You know what it is though, right? Like the bulletin board system?
I've heard about it.
Okay, so back then, like we're talking like PHP BB 1 or 2 maybe. Like the way you wrote plugins for PHP BB was literally they would give you a hack. They were called hacks, okay? They would give you a hack file and it would say, go to this line in this core file and add this code after it. Like the way to extend PHP BB before they had like a plugin system or an extension system was to literally hack core. Like, and at the time I didn't even know what PHP was, let alone I was like doing something as abhorrent as hacking core. But like I learned an awful lot about how PHP PHP and MySQL worked by hacking PHP BB to write hacks for that. So I was like contributing extensions and even put in a core patch, I think, for PHP BB like in 2001, 2002. And the funny thing is probably 5 years passed without doing any PHP work. And then suddenly I find myself, you know, developing WordPress in PHP. And it was like, and the PHP BB was like a faint nightmare memory from 5 years before that I like suppressed. I suppressed the fact that I'd learned PHP in 2003. And then suddenly I was doing WordPress development in 2008. And it all made sense. I'm like, hey, you know, I remember learning this. Oh, wait, I learned this doing PHP BB hacks like 5 years ago. So that's sort of my pre-WordPress story. I guess you could say I fell into this profession.
So what was your escalation professionally? Did you have some roles at different companies, or were you ever doing freelance work from, you know, when you first started learning?
Well, it started in college, or right after college, I should say. So probably the easiest way to explain it is to explain college to you. So I went into college as a piano performance major, and then I decided I didn't want to relearn 4 years of music theory, so I decided not to do that. And I ended up doing like general studies for the next 2 years, which in retrospect was a mistake because I took all the general studies and then I picked a major, but the problem is then you end up like doing 2 straight years of your major classes because there's no filler anymore. So I did all the general studies and then I had to pick a major, and all of a sudden I was taking like 6 journalism classes at once every semester. So I was basically doing photojournalism and communication theory in college, and I ended up graduating with a double major in communication theory and photojournalism, or journalism really. And after college, I got an internship doing working for an online news startup in Denver. They needed somebody to take photos and like manage their website, and which was built on WordPress. And when I was in college, I worked for the student newspaper, and they were working off some heinously built website built with like Cold Fusion or something. It was awful, by the way. And they ended up switching to WordPress, and I had to learn how to use WordPress. Well, I had to learn about it so that we could build the site on it. And I quickly outgrew the web developers in our office. They looked down so hard on WordPress because we'd moved from Cold Fusion to like WordPress or whatever. I'm like, just make me an admin. You don't have to do anything. Just give it to me, and I'll just do it. So I learned WordPress when I was in college because out of necessity, and I've been doing it ever since. So that would have been 2007, 2008 maybe. But then, yeah, right after college, again, remember, I just graduated from college with a journalism degree, and I was working as a photojournalist for an online news startup here. And so I was like taking photos and updating their WordPress site or whatever, and then I ended up doing WordPress development for this news startup. And then at some point I ended up like doing side gigs, like freelance work for other news organizations in town, until eventually I was like, you know, I could do this full time, and it pays a lot more than photojournalism, which is like pays like nothing. Like you don't do photojournalism to make money. You do it for the love of capturing the human condition or whatever. But I ended up I ended up doing WordPress development full time because it paid a lot more and I had a lot more fun. So
nice.
Yeah.
So did you have to go there? Did you go full time freelance for a while?
Yeah, I was full time freelance for like a year. I mean, obviously I left some things out. Like I was working at the Office of Student Media, which is where the student newspaper was. I worked there for like a year and a half after I graduated. And I mentored some students, and I taught some people how to develop WordPress and some other things, and they went on to get better jobs than I had. And at a certain point, I was like, you know what, I should get out of here and get a real job, because you know, some of the people who are working for me are now working for these like amazing WordPress companies, and I'm still working at this college making like nothing. Like I feel like I'm being overshadowed, so I need to go I need to go get another job. So that's when I applied to work at 10up, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, so I went like straight from like higher ed college to working in higher ed to working at 10up. And then I worked at 10up for 3 years.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then just earlier this year,
Mm-hmm.
became a full-time member of Affiliate WP.
That's right. Yeah. Left straight from 10up to Affiliate WP. That was awesome.
That is pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. So that's quite the background. That's pretty. It sounds like you got to be involved in some pretty interesting projects, some cool use cases for WordPress. Were there any particularly standout projects or anything that you got involved in that maybe really you were pushing the boundaries of WordPress or really accelerated your experience? Just anything that stood out in your freelance life or through your employers is just big and crazy.
Yeah, some of them I can't tell you about, or I can generalize for you, like from 10up. But I think honestly, one of my first projects that was really complex was actually a project we did at the Office of Student Media. They have in the Office of Student Media, they have like a TV station and a radio station and a student newspaper and a literary and arts magazine. And for the literary and arts magazine, it's called Metrosphere. They wanted to do like an online only version of their art magazine. So I was like working alongside this designer, and we came up with this concept for the website, and it ended up being this like beast of a build because there was all these custom post types and taxonomies and all this other stuff that I'd like never messed with before. I remember writing this heinous loop to grab, I mean, now I would never ever do this again, but I wrote this insane custom loop to like pull in all this information. And I felt really proud of that project just because I learned so much about how WordPress worked with that project. You know, like how to do custom post type archives and how to manipulate post meta and when to use post meta and when not to, because when you're working with thousands of items, you really want to, you know, is it really performant to use meta? No. And this is of course pre-term meta, any, you know, so you're working with like bare WordPress. And in that project, we learned an awful lot about theme development. We learned an awful lot about plugin development. So I think that was really when I was like, that was the first project that I did that was like, oh, this is really cool. WordPress is really flexible, and I can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. And incidentally, the designer that I work with on that, his name is Chris LeGraff. He's the head of support at Pagely now.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's been there for 3 years. Yeah, he went straight from Metro to Pagely. So, yeah, and he's killing it over there. So, yeah, so he and I worked on that project, and that was one of the last ones. We did a little bit of freelance on the side outside of Metro, but then, yeah, I mean, he went and got a gig at Pagely and left me in the dust. But he's killing it over there, so you can't really blame him, right?
Yeah, not at all.
So I'd say from an initial complexity perspective, the Metrosphere site was huge. I mean, they ended up like redesigning the next year because the problem is they put out a new edition every year and the theme changes every year. So they like had to rebuild the site again. So we lost all that work, but it was a cool learning experience. I mean, once I bridged into 10up, then it got, you know, like everything just gets more complicated. You know, you're working at 10up, and 10up works with these high scale, high traffic, high touch clients, you know, and it's like some of the sites you work on, you're like, wow, I'm really surprised to be working on this, but it's almost all of them have really super interesting challenges to overcome. And the thing I found the most interesting is that it was almost never like, oh, I need to have better SEO so I can drive traffic to my website. It was like they had the traffic when they came to the door. You know, they were like, we have an established site that already gets millions of visitors a day or whatever, and we just need you to make this scalable. So, I mean, the cool thing about working at 10up is that everyone you work with is amazing at what they do, because I feel like Jake Goldman has a really good BS meter in hiring. So the cool thing is that, you know, your dream project is when you're working on a project and you have defined roles and everyone just stays in their roles. And you don't have to, like, you know, sometimes you're the only developer on a project, so you might have to do design and development, or like front end development and back end development. Probably not design, like, because, you know, that's, designers are amazing and that's what designers are for, and I'm not a designer. I mean, I can work within a design, but I am not an original designer. So it's really cool when you get to work on projects where you're focused on back end or you're focused on QA, and that's your job, and everyone else is doing their job, and in the end you meet in the middle and everything is amazing and perfect. So I think there were like 2 projects that stood out for me. Well, okay, there's a bunch of projects, and some of them I can't tell you who it is, but I can broadly explain them. One of them was there are projects, or I don't know if there still are, but there used to be projects at 10up called Jake projects, okay, or Jake clients, and those are essentially people who were Jake's clients before he started 10up.
Wow.
So they get, like, in some cases they get like a slightly different touch because they're used to working with Jake directly. So it's actually kind of an honor to be given a Jake client, but at the same time you're kind of like, wow, I got a Jake client. So this one project that I worked on when I first started working at 10up was it was for this company, PRG, and they're essentially the production company that supplies equipment for, like, the Super Bowl halftime show.
Wow.
And stuff. You know, like this huge multinational corporation that does all these, like, lighting and stuff. And Jake had custom built their site, and there was all this, like, insane functionality under the hood, you know, things you've never seen before in WordPress, and maybe in anything else either. But he had built this, like, regionalization engine that would regionalize content based on, you know, like 12 different regions, and then it would be translated into 4 different languages. So any given page, there could be like 30 different permutations of that same page, depending on what region and what language you were in. It was insane.
Wow.
And he built that, but it was like super interesting to work within the confines of that, because, you know, it's like you're working with, like, the best example I can give you is, let's say you're on a page that has a gallery, okay, and let's say you're pulling in 100 images into this gallery. The gallery is regionalized. So if you're in Germany, you see different images than if you're in America. But in the back end, it's all one gallery. You're just filtering out certain things depending on which region you're in. And it's fascinating. So, I mean, it was a bore to work on that project, but it was awesome. You know, it's like, wow. So another one was this site. It was like an affiliate site, actually, but it was just like, it had been built by the owner. The owner fancied himself a developer, and he'd built his own site, and then we would work on it, like, alongside him, but he would just push changes to production in the middle of the night, like, you know, and sometimes it wasn't always this was not a J client, by the way, it was just a client. And but the interesting thing about that is that Zach Brown, the director of systems at 10up, had devised this completely amazing caching scheme for this website. Like, it was maybe the fastest site I've ever seen on the front end when you're logged out. I mean, ever. Any fastest site ever. For the amount of data that was getting loaded, it was mind-blowing. Wow. How well the caching scheme was built for the site. And so you get to work with these people like Zach, who's just a wizard when it comes to systems. And it was really amazing to work alongside those people, because like I mentioned, everyone is amazing. So you just know you're going to get amazing work on the other side. But it also means that it's really hard to shine in that environment because everyone is amazing. So probably the last project I would give an example from is a university site that I worked on right before I left Tenno, about 6 or 8 months before I left, I think. That was the first project I got to work on in a back-end role only. Like they pretty much said, you're going to just work on back-end for this project. That's it. And that was awesome. It was awesome because I didn't have to worry about front-end design or front-end development. I got to focus entirely on sort of the database layer and working with doing some like crazy stuff. Like, you know, now we have the WP site object. This is like pre-WP site object. I basically wrote the WP site object for this project because they were building like a site directory and they were migrating from another multi-site install. And they had like 300 departmental websites or subsites, and I was building this directory for the front end. And the problem was that not all of the sites had actually been moved yet. So they needed like a site directory where you could reference actual sites or fake sites that were like external, because the other sites are still on their old network. So basically, it was like a WP site object, but you could like spin up dynamic site objects that were not real. And you could cache them and you could display them and they would look like real sites, but they weren't.
Okay.
And you know, and then right after that was when I was working on Core full time for like 6 months before I left Tenno.
Right.
So that was the last client project I worked on, and then I did full-time Core community development for like 7 months, and then I left Tenno. So
that's pretty cool.
And now I work on a plugin, and I do nothing but backend all the time, and it's awesome.
Let's go there. Tell us a little bit about. First, if anybody doesn't know, you know, give us an intro real quick to Affiliate WP, and then let's talk about your role there, what your responsibilities are.
So Affiliate WP is an affiliate marketing plugin built into WordPress. That, you know, which, by the way, before I worked on Affiliate WP, I had this like completely different opinion of affiliate marketing. Like I thought it was kind of skeezy. Like, and I'm like, I don't, you know. And when I first joined this project, I had to learn all the lingo. You know, like what's a referral, what's a visit, what's an affiliate, what's a campaign, all these things. So Affiliate WP essentially allows you to award commissions to people who are your affiliate, well, affiliate sellers, we'll say. So like, let's say you're running a site on WooCommerce. You can run an affiliate program with Affiliate WP, and every time someone buys a product from you, you can, well, yeah, let's say, yeah. All right, so basically, let's say there's a site owner, a business owner, running a WooCommerce site, okay? And they're running an affiliate program. Anytime their affiliate sells a product on their site, on the site owner's site, the site owner can award them a commission. So it's basically you're awarding them affiliate payouts for helping you sell your products. So our actual customer are the business owners,
right,
who run the affiliate program themselves. But it's really interesting because it introduces all of these paradigms of like, well, I want to do this crazy thing combined with this other crazy thing. And by the way, I'm running 15 extensions that all have to work together to make this other thing possible. So you're constantly just like juggling 5 or 6 different variables in any given problem. So it's really challenging, but it's really fun to think like that. To think in terms of developing for extension, I guess, right? Like, I guess in a way that's what WordPress is, right? WordPress is largely coded defensively in a lot of cases because you just never really know how people are going to misuse what you're building. That is in some respects true for building plugins like Affiliate WP, where they are intended to be extended. But we are far less. We code far less defensively than like WordPress core does.
Sure.
Okay. But another good thing to think about is, I've heard Pippin talk about this. It's like building easy digital downloads is a similar problem, and in building for extension, sometimes you'll get people doing like insane things with EDD that you would never ever imagine possible, or then you see something like GiveWP, which is a fork of EDD, like that they had bent EDD to the point of breaking, and they finally just decided to fork it. Like, I mean, on the one hand, it's like it's super flattering, but at the same time, it's like, really? So, my role, I guess, at Affiliate WP is I'm just a developer. We don't have titles. I mean, I'm just one of the main developers currently of Affiliate WP.
Are there any specific things that stand out where this comes up and everybody knows, oh, Drew's going to handle that?
At this point, it seems like they like to just randomly assign everything to me. Well, that's because Rami, I think you had Rami on here 30 episodes ago or something. Yeah. Rami works largely on a lot of the extensions that we have, because we maintain a lot of pro extensions and free extensions too. But he works a lot on things like the Ninja Forms extension and a lot, and we have the Zapier extension coming up and a bunch of other things. So I'm largely I guess you could call me a core developer for Affiliate WP. So it's pretty much anything. It's like anything in a given day. If we're working on a point release or we're working on a major release, typically we're working on both at the same time, which makes it a little bit interesting because you have to prioritize. Like, well, is this something we need to fix right now, or is this something that's going to take 6 months to write? And we're on a schedule of trying to do major releases every 3 months, which is, I think, it's pretty realistic. We just released 1.9 at the end of September, and we're already working on 2.0. But that's the thing, is we're working on 2.0, but we're also working on like the next point release, which is 1.9.5. So it's interesting drawing a distinction between the two and being able to like think about the bigger picture for a 2.0 release item versus like, when are we going to do the next point release? Okay, maybe probably like 2 weeks from now or something. It's making sure. I feel like this is kind of unofficial, but it's sort of making sure that there's a balance in the point releases. Like, we don't generally want to just release bug fixes. We want to try to throw a nugget in there, like a tweak or a new feature here and there, because otherwise it's just, we start to look like the gang who couldn't shoot straight, Like, if all we're doing is fixing bugs. Like, it's nice to throw a little interesting something in there once in a while, other than like, oh, by the way, we fixed this heinous bug that was widescreening your WordPress install.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there anything that, I'm just curious, that your background is a little bit different, not so much focused on product development. Is there anything that really stands out from your unique background in journalism sites and working with media, and then working for 10up on large scale client projects, and working on WordPress core extensively for a little while? That when you look at other developers maybe that you work with or that you just have experience with in our industry, is there anything that your background you think lends to your unique perspective? How do you think it influences how you look at your work differently than other developers might?
Well, I think this is where documentation comes in.
All right.
Because a lot of people know me for the work that I've done maintaining inline documentation for WordPress core, which, I mean, I think a lot of people are under some impression that I didn't start doing documentation because I liked it. I started doing documentation because nobody else was doing it and somebody needed to do it. But I think over time, I grew to appreciate it. And the thing I've found in doing documentation work for like WordPress core, or even developer-facing documentation like on the Developer Hub on WordPress.org, is an appreciation for writing self-documenting code. Because that one thing that core does actually very well is write self-documenting code, in addition to writing good documentation alongside the code. So
Sure.
when I'm approaching a project, I approach writing code from a perspective that somebody else will follow along later and have to understand it. Even if I'm writing it for some client, like it's like a freelance gig and I'm writing this one-time plugin for one client, I will write it in a way that another developer can come along later and figure out immediately what's going on. And I think that's just from parsing through WordPress core for years and figuring out how to best explain to other developers what's going on. The interesting thing about writing inline documentation is that you learn a lot about a code base in trying to explain it to others, right? Like one of the lead developers one time said to me that they think that I might have greater knowledge of the WordPress code base than maybe anyone else in some cases, because I've read almost all of it at least once.
Wow.
Because when you're writing documentation, it's not limited to one component. Like I'm reading code for like the pingback API, I'm just reading the code for the pingback API, for instance, and I'm trying to write documentation for this, and I'm just like, I don't know how this works. I don't know why they wrote it like this, but somebody has to explain it, because the documentation is not complete. So you write documentation for an API you've never seen before, and that forces you to learn how to use that API so you can explain it to other people, right?
Right.
So the interesting thing about that is that means, a byproduct of that is that I have been exposed to maybe a little bit more of the core code base than most people. So when I write code for for working for Affiliate WP or freelance projects, or I work with other developers, I encourage them to write more self-documenting code. More docs are not, there are some people who believe more documentation is always better, and that's, there is a limit to how useful documentation can actually be. The code should explain what it's doing, and it should do it as succinctly as it possibly can, which, is a good bridge into unit testing. which in a way, by the way, I would consider unit testing to be an extension of documentation as well, because you have to write tests to expect what your code is meant to do, and then test for it. So I guess I feel like if you can't write clear tests for how your code should work, it's too convoluted. And that also means that it's probably too convoluted to explain on its own, separate from the unit test. So in a way, I kind of view unit testing to be an extension of documentation. So I guess probably that's the number one thing I bring to maybe my unique background is probably my experience in documentation.
Yeah.
Because it changes the way you think about what you do.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways, but that's really cool, and that you would identify that, because there's a lot of ways that developers would identify, and a lot of ways, frames through which you would look at your code. So while they're all valid, some developers, from their experience, emphasize certain things. So some developer may say, I've had experience where things don't scale right, so I'm always looking at my code and worrying about scaling. How could this be misused, and how could this, or I'm always working about how could somebody hack this. This is what I emphasize. I always look at the security aspect, or I always look for being as concise as possible, or like you said, being as self-documenting as possible. All these things are really, really important, but each developer comes into a project, has their own perspective on what they emphasize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, the interesting thing is switching from client work to product work, working on affiliate WP, has just been a dream.
A dream.
Well, it is. It's like you go from working on really high quality client code to working on really high quality product code. Like to work with Pippin is amazing because I just know the code is going to be awesome. Like it's already self-documenting. You know, it's already as simple as it can be in almost all cases.
Yeah.
And that's awesome because that gives you a good framework upon which to build. I think you and Rami talked about documentation. He sent out this tweet a while back, like when he realized that I write inline documentation manually, like his mind was blown when I told him that. He's like, "What do you use to like generate document?" I'm like, "I write it all manually. What are you talking about?" And it's I don't know, like some people just, it's mind blowing to think like, what, you just like wrote all of that? I'm like, yeah, I wrote it all. And that's because, you know, sometimes you come into an existing project and you just, I think the first thing I do is I read docs in any new code base. And if there are no docs, that's the first warning flag. Like, and that's not a diss on the developer or whatever, because maybe that wasn't their priority. But I just feel like when you're working in open source, you should assume that your code will be open source and that other people will come along later. Like you have a duty to make your code understandable in open source software.
Way cool. Way cool. Yeah, we've talked to a lot of people. I mean, Rami's another example who have switched from services to products and had a positive experience. I probably have had more switching in that direction on this show, you know, given that we've had well over 100 guests on the show since we started now and had similar conversations. I think there's definitely a lot more conversations I've had with people making the switch in that direction than the other, people switching from products to services. What kind of reflections do you have on that? Is that just a coincidence, or do you really think that a lot of us who get involved in this industry and do it for some time naturally eventually get drawn to the grass that's greener on the product side?
I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that people move to products because they want to have some level of extended ownership over their work. That's why I moved from clients to products. It wasn't that I didn't own the code I was working on the 10-up or whatever. It's that it was part of a larger whole. And moving to products allows you to iterate on the same thing and do iterative improvement. Whereas in a lot of client work, even if you have like a maintenance contract or something, most of the time you're doing one-time work, right? Like you're building a thing to solve a problem, and then you may never actually touch that code again. For me, I liked, you know, the idea of moving to products meant that I could continuously iterate on the same code and make it gradually better all the time. But I could also build something so extensible that later I could come back and add something. You know, I could extend my own. It's a really gratifying feeling to be able to come back like 6 months later and extend your own code to do a thing, you know, because you wrote it right the first time.
Right.
It's hard to do that with like a theme or something that you're building one time for a client, because most of the time you're never going to see that again. You're like, oh yeah, I built a thing one time for this client. But it's another thing entirely to be able to say, yeah, I built this thing, and oh, by the way, I extended this API today, and it saved me like 4 hours of work because I already wrote the API that this uses. I think that's the most gratifying part for me, is that I get to continuously iterate on the work that I do. You know, and the other part of it, and this might, I think, go to a lot of other people who switch from clients to products, and that is that the developer-client relationship is different from the developer-customer relationship. They're both paying you to do something, right? But with the customer relationship, the needs are can vary drastically from one customer to another. Whereas with clients, you're working in usually a very specific spec and scope. So I think there's an upside in working with clients because it keeps you grounded in not getting stuck developing one way or developing one feature in one way, because you have to build it for the bigger whole, and it keeps you on your toes. Working for one client who's running a digital download site and one client who's selling widgets out of their garage, they're going to have drastically different needs, but they may use the same solution to get means to an end there. So I think it's grounding to work for customers, and more grounding to work for customers than it is to work for clients. That's probably the other reason why I moved. But I think there's probably other people in the same boat. It's in a lot of ways, working on WordPress core is product work.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't think about it that way, but you are continuously iterating on WordPress core when you're working on WordPress core. And I found, like the last 7 months of working at 10up when I was working on core full time, that working on core specifically or working in the community specifically was actually really burned me out, which is why I left 10up. But I found that moving to like true product work actually had less of a burnout effect, because you're working with customers. Just as in core development, you're working with customers, which would be, I guess, the user base, right? The problem is that when you're building a product of that size for that many customers, the intent can get screwed up and the direction can get screwed up. It's nice working on something like Affiliate WP where we have sort of a defined customer base, generally speaking, but they all have different needs and wants and desires about how the product should work.
Right.
So I think it's I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of people like the ability to continuously iterate. I think, and the perspective change is the big one, is moving from working for one client to working for many customers, right? It's more rewarding, I think, in my opinion.
I get you. Let's talk media a little bit, and specifically WordPress media. I'm kind of curious. So,
as I call it,
maybe broadly at first, somebody new to the WordPress scene walks in. Hey, I'm interested in the WordPress stuff. I want to follow WordPress news. How do I keep up? And what does the news about WordPress world look like? Just give me the intro. How do you take it, Drew?
Well, it would depend on what kind of WordPress person they were, right? So if they were a developer or designer, somebody working in the industry, I would say buy a subscription to the Post Status Club, right? That's going to be your best. You're going to get your best return on investment by joining the Post Status Club if you're in the industry, right? If you're more like a casual user, somebody who's just getting involved with WordPress and you want to learn about what's new, I'd say WP Tavern. WP Tavern is a good happy medium for people of all levels, but I'd say typically more like beginning to intermediate-ish level WordPress every man, woman, right? Their demographic is the every person. I guess if you want to be politically correct, right? The every person is WP Tavern, and then as you spiral out from there, there's other sort of more like niche sites, and you have Torque Magazine, which I don't really follow. I don't know much about, and things like WP Shout and WP Beginner, and even WPMU Dev and other things. I think typically you're going to see people go to Post Status or the Tavern or both. But they are the WordPress, as I call them. Having a journalism background, it's interesting to sort of observe the WordPress from the outside. I think Jeff Chandler has really grown as a journalist in the time that I've been following the tavern. This, probably 6 or 7 years now. It was really interesting to see Brian Karsgaard start Post Status the way he did, because it was paid for content. It was like, I guess it was not that far off from like what they tried to do with WP Quarterly through WP Candy. And a common joke in the WordPress community is when is the next edition of WP Quarterly coming out, which is like never. I think the WP Candies of the WordPress are incredibly important, and I would like to actually see more. I would like to see maybe another, even like a WP Daily come around again. I felt like that felt really weird, like when John Saddington started WP Daily, and then they were just like killing it, and then all of a sudden one day they're just like, and we're done. And you're like, really? I mean, you guys were doing such a great job, and you're just bailing now? I feel like there is a benefit in competition, right, between the news outlets. And again, I don't think there's actually that much overlap between like Post Status and the tavern, and I think they play off of each other very well right now. But I would like to see some more competition. I'd like to see another WP Dailies pop up, for instance, or if we can get Ryan Emmel to come back, we'll just get WP Candy fired up again.
So that's a really interesting angle to take. So you are of the mind that there is room there for all kinds of stuff. So I mean, maybe a random off the top of my head parallel is we're starting to see in the event-based space more narrowly focused WordPress events pop up. We've got WP Campus focusing on WordPress in higher ed. We have LoopConf focusing on WordPress for advanced developers. Mm-hmm. We have Pressnomics and PrestigeConf and focusing on the business of WordPress. Maybe there's room for more, or I should say, less broadly focused news sources focusing on different aspects of the WordPress community. Or that could be one way to look at it. But you're basically saying there's a few names that we can mention who cover a lot of WordPress news, but space is big enough for more.
I think so. And there's like a little bit of an inside joke going around that Post Status should just rebrand themselves to REST API News, because Brian Krogsgaard has been essentially working as a project manager for the REST API merge in the 4.7 release.
That's true.
And Joe Hoyle is one of the lead developers for the REST API project, and he's the co-host of Post Status. So it's funny because it's like every time you turn around now, Post Status is writing something about the REST API. It's like, talk about something else.
There's a lot going on, and
yeah.
It is kind of interesting, and I wonder, there's probably a lot of people who wouldn't maybe feel that way, but I tend to agree with you that when I look for WordPress news on the web, or I open up my podcast app and look for WordPress stuff, there's a lot of stuff there, but enough? I don't really think so.
I don't think so. And the interesting thing too, by the way, is when I was leading the 4.2 release, like probably the number one piece of advice you get as a release lead is to not read about your release. Don't read about your release, because you don't, it's like, it's never going to be good, and you don't want to see the criticism. Like, you should just not read about your release. And I actually managed to hold off doing that until like maybe beta, and then I started hunting around the web frantically looking for anything written about 4.2, and I discovered there were a lot of like non-English language WordPress blogs out there that I didn't know about, because I'm an English speaker, so why would I even have any exposure? Like, I just like to think that there's a whole like other network of WordPress news sites that are like in German or Portuguese or whatever, I found some of them. I read some of their articles in Translator or whatever, but I just, like outside of, you were talking a minute ago about like more niche sites, right? Like I agree with that. I think it would be interesting to see more niche WordPress news sites popping up. But in that vein, you also have like the sites that are just using kind of a different format, right? So you have like Post Status, which is technically membership content for the most part with a public blog, but pretty much it's all like in the newsletter or whatever. But then you have things like WP Chat, which I would actually qualify as news, even though it's kind of not, but it kind of is because it's notable what's being discussed right now, you also have like WP Force and WP Engineer and as I mentioned, the WPMU dev blog, which take that with a grain of salt. And then, but then and then WordPress Planet is still a thing, like, or you have Hero Press, Topher DeRocha's Hero Press, which I would qualify as, honestly, I would qualify that as feature writing, right?
Sure.
It's nice to see. It's nice to see those little niches, but I would love to see something like the Code Poet blog get started up again.
Right.
There, in a lot of ways, you are embodying the Code Poet blog in WP Roundtable. It was very much interviews with people in the community, and they're not necessarily notable, just people in the community. And in a lot of ways, Hero Press kind of picked that baton up, but I would like to see the Code Poet blog started up again, or even as a podcast, started up again as a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, I'm distracting myself mid-conversation, but didn't Torque buy the archives for WP Daily? I think that's right.
Mm.
I think they bought the back archives for WP Daily when John Saddington sold it. Yeah, so anyway, but just getting back into like the niche stuff or the different formats, I think the more the community experiments with how to deliver, I guess, newsworthy content. I wouldn't necessarily call it mostly news. I would call it newsworthy because it's essentially industry news is what we're talking about here. Like, because for the most part, WordPress news is not interesting outside of the WordPress space.
Right.
Right? Like, unless it isn't. I mean, we're in a bubble, whether we want to believe it or not. We're in a WordPress bubble where we're constantly sharing rumors and chatting back and forth about the industry that we're in.
Right.
I think it would be interesting to see more writing, like, or it is more interesting to see writing from people who are maybe not industry insiders. Like you see these reviews, external reviews of WordPress that then just get like ripped to pieces inside of our bubble.
Yeah.
I think it's valuable for people in the bubble to see perspectives from outside the bubble. Because a big problem we have in this community is that we're very insular and that we're not very integrated with the wider PHP community, which is why in a lot of ways we're looked down upon by the PHP community because we're not involved in the PHP community. And that's not for
surprise you, really, given, I mean, we're a big community. We're huge.
I know.
It's not that hard to get caught in this bubble because it's a really big bubble.
Well, I know, and honestly, I mean, I could talk for days about this, but it's just, I think it kind of comes down to, like, I can't believe I'm saying this, by the way. I'm just gonna say it. I feel like WordPress, in a lot of ways, is sort of like the Microsoft of PHP. Okay.
Whoa.
In that we are the huge project that has huge market share. I'm not saying we're breaking monopoly laws or anything. I'm just saying, like Microsoft did. I'm saying that we're, in a lot of ways, are setting our own standards, and it's a little bit ridiculous for other projects to say to us, you need to do it this way because it's been established by many other projects that this is the way to do things. And all I say to them is, we have 30%, almost 30% market share, and you're trying to tell us the thing we've been doing longer than your project's been alive
right.
is the wrong way, and that we should then adhere to your standards. And I mean, it's not, I don't come at it from an antagonistic perspective. I just come at it from, the WordPress way is a real thing, right? Like the way we document or the way we write code may not be up to modern standards in a lot of cases, because it frankly isn't, right? But that doesn't necessarily make it bad. And I think that's something everyone needs to sort of step back and consider, is that WordPress may not be doing things to the most modern standards in a lot of cases because we have legacy code or because of baggage or technical debt or whatever. But in a lot of cases, the WordPress way is a real thing. And you have to consider that WordPress is immensely popular in the world for a reason, or probably for many reasons, right? Like, we are one of the only open source software systems that's philosophy is built around user first, right?
That's true.
Like, which is why we support 100% backcompat, and much to the chagrin of many a developer, that we support 100% backcompat. But I think one thing that a lot of people don't consider is, like, to write something 100% backcompat is really challenging. Like, whenever you want to add something new, you have to consider, you know, will this have the same experience if you're using this other thing? You know, am I going to change the experience? And if I am, is that acceptable? Does that constitute a backcompat break? And if it does, then we should probably, like, fix that so that it doesn't break, right? It's a real challenge to write 100% backward compatible code. Hugely challenging. So it's like, I don't consider WordPress the Microsoft of PHP. I think that might be overstating a little bit, but it gives you the perspective of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's basically saying, we have this project that has like 26, 27, whatever percent, 26% market share or whatever. And you're trying to tell me that the system we've been using for 13 years is not the right way to do it.
Right.
Because somebody who came along 6 years ago and started a project decided arbitrarily with a bunch of other projects who are also younger in most cases, arbitrarily decided that their way is better and that we should be doing it their way. Is a little bit insane. On the same token, you know, I think WordPress needs to, we need to bump the minimum PHP version, you know, a couple years ago. But I mean, there's very valid reasons for why it hasn't happened. It's this debate has gone round and round. It's like the GPL debate; it never ends.
Right.
It's essentially that we don't want to leave users behind, or we don't want to leave too many users behind, right? Like, a lot of people are like, you know, PHP 5.2 is at 5%, so we should bump it now. And you have to consider, like, you honestly cannot ignore the market share aspect of the discussion. Like, yeah, oh, you guys are only at 5%, so you can bump it now. Well, 5% is like hundreds of thousands of websites. That's not like a couple sites. It's like 5% is a big chunk of users.
It is.
So, you know, you can't, I think it's irresponsible to disregard the market share as part of that argument, like to say, we're at 5%, so we should bump it. I'm like, well, you know, that's still a pretty big chunk of people there. You know, and then what do you do when you do that? Do you just, like, make it so they can't update and then leave them in the lurch because you're no longer doing security updates? Like, we would still have to do security updates for those older versions. So it's kind of like, I think we're going to get there, though. I think we're going to get to the point pretty soon. I mean, I don't have insider information. I don't have any more information than you do, even though I'm a core developer, about when we're going to bump it. But I think it's going to happen pretty soon, you know, because we're getting to the point now where where and a lot of people argue this, that where it would be irresponsible not to, right? I think on the same vein, it may be a little irresponsible of the PHP project to be releasing so quickly. But then it's a little hard to be saying that as a WordPress developer who who has no problem with WordPress releasing new versions every 3 months.
Right.
But I mean, you have like PHP 7, and now they're like end of lifing PHP 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, whatever, and you're just like, really? You guys end of life this already? Like, throw us a bone. Like, we can't jump from 5.2 to 5.5. I mean, we could, and realistically, there's a lot of people who think we should. If you're going to do it, if you're going to bump it to like 5.5 or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, the WordPress minimum, it's not the minimum requirements, but the minimum recommendations, are like right in line with modern development. A lot of people don't know that. They think that because WordPress supports 5.2 that we promote using 5.2. And I would disagree with that.
Right.
Like the minimum recommendations for running WordPress is PHP 5.6. Even though we still run on 5.2, it's PHP 5.6 and MySQL 5.6, I think, too.
Right.
But yes, we can support all the way back to PHP 5 or MySQL 5 and PHP 5.2 or whatever. I think I don't know. It's really annoying to me to see a lot of these discussions because people are completely willing to disregard facts to make their argument. I think if you haven't been following core development, probably one of the more interesting discussions that's been happening in the last 3 months is about like using an autoloader in core. And it's not even really like a composer discussion. It's just, should we use an autoloader? Like if we can get beyond composer, because really composers are composers mostly about dependency injection and other things. If you can get beyond that and just think about like, should core use an autoloader, and then how would that work with plugins? Would it just be core? And I think it's really healthy to be having these discussions,
right.
Because I think it shows that developers are in a lot of ways now taking WordPress more seriously, even if it means that they're pointing out all the things that they think are wrong with it. Like core development, the way that happens is that you find a thing, I think, and Boone, when he was on here, said something about this too. It's like you find a thing, you figure out how to fix it, and you propose it with a well-reasoned argument, it will almost always get committed to core, like depending on what it is, right? That's how all of us got started contributing to core, was we found a thing that didn't work, or WordPress didn't do the thing that we wanted it to do, so we convinced other people that it needed to do those things too. And the difference is that some of us just did that a lot more than other people. Like,
you mean like leaving a sarcastic, rude comment in a tavern article isn't enough to get my feature into core?
No, and you also can't like start a ticket on track and then just like walk away and never come back, because that's probably not going to work out the way you think it is.
I thought you guys had it from here.
In some cases, yeah, but usually no. So
yeah,
I think it's just, I think WordPress is going through some interesting growing pains right now, and it's not a bad thing. I think it's a great thing to have more activity from the wider development community in WordPress decision making right now. Even if it's just people in the peanut gallery, right? I think it's nice to have more viewpoints because of the bubble we discussed. You get in the bubble, and then you're having discussions with other people in the bubble, and then pretty soon you're just like part of the hive mind, and you all have the same ideas. and you all want to go move toward the same ideas, and then somebody outside the hive mind is like, what are you doing? You're speaking for me, and I don't feel like I'm being represented in this hive mind. So I got pretty far off track, but the from the original question, which I think I've lost at this point, it was like 10 minutes ago, you asked me a question.
That's okay.
I think it just comes down to needing, we were talking about the press, like WordPress. There is absolutely room for competition. I think in some ways, having things like podcast companions to things like the Tavern or Post Status with the draft post, like the draft podcast for Post Status and the WP Weekly podcast for WP Tavern. I think that's a nice complement to the written content that they're doing. And I would actually like to see more, you know, like I would like to see like a news podcast, right? Like you don't really see that. I mean, that's kind of what WP Weekly is, but it's not. Like they, you know, they have interviews with people and they kind of talk about what's coming up sometimes, and they have plug and fix of the week and things. But like, I think it would be really neat to see a newscast, a WordPress newscast. You know, like this week in core development, or this week in WordPress plugin, like specifically about plugins. I think you see a lot of podcasts that have their discussion geared or whatever. Like, I think one of the best ones at that is like Mastermind. It's really short. You know, it's only like 30 minutes or whatever. So it's almost always an interview with somebody really interesting you probably never even heard of, in a lot of cases. But it's just short enough that you can take in one episode and move on about your day without really having to like sit down and do, you know, like when I listen to Draft or I listen to Apply Filters or whatever, I can't work. I can't like listen to that and work because my mind is filled with like, oh yeah, I could totally build this, or I could build this other thing, or I can't. There's so much going on in my mind when I'm listening to these shows. Like even this show, I can't listen to this while I'm working. It's really hard because I just want to focus on what you and your guests are saying, you know. But I kind of want like the RSS feed version, an audio RSS feed of WordPress news, like once a week.
I like
somebody
it.
Just make that for me, would you? Speaking of which, I'm actually considering starting my own podcast.
Ooh, that's interesting. It's
not to compete. It's actually in a niche that's not covered right now, as far as I know. You want me to tease it here first? Because I've never even told anyone about this.
You know, well, I want you to.
I told a couple people, but I don't have any content. Like I don't have any interviews or anything yet. Because I'm it's not because I'm lazy. It's because I literally just don't have time.
Right.
But I'm starting a podcast called .org. It's the WordPress.org podcast.
Ooh, wow.
And the focus will be on contributing. It will be on contributing to WordPress.
I love it. I love it so much.
And it's not about, you know, ideally it would be interviews with people who are contributors in the community from various, you know, I'd probably start with like underserved teams. Like that's a big thing for me is finding underserved teams more help, like accessibility or the training team or marketing. These are teams that are largely underserved because they're specialized or because it's just not sexy or whatever. Like Docs is actually a pretty underserved team because nobody wants to do it. You know, like everyone wants to read documentation, but nobody wants to help write it. And that's an age-old problem. So I thought about starting this .org podcast to try and highlight some of those underserved teams and try to get, you know, it's like if you know a thing, you can probably help. You know, a lot of people think they have to be like a professional contributor to contribute to WordPress. It's not. You don't have to. You know, You can join the accessibility testing team, which is amazing, by the way. Like, I don't know if you've ever interviewed anyone from the accessibility team, but you should. Like
We had Joe Dawson on the team on the show before.
Joe Dolson or Rian Riedfeld or Andrea Ferscher or any of those people. Like, they have this. They have. Sorry, I love the accessibility team. Okay, so the accessibility team, like, they have a testing team made up of like 50 people, right? And they come up with these tasks like go test like some aspect of the customizer or whatever, like some very specific thing. They give them a task, go test this. And then they just like deploy this army of accessibility testers, and they come back with all this amazing feedback. Like, oh yeah, I used this with my screen reader and it totally didn't work. Or or I used it with this and this was really super confusing or whatever. But now that they've got this honed in to this amazing accessibility testing team, and they're making WordPress development better. They're using WordPress better because they're constantly on top of it, of what's coming in. Let's test the thing. Let's get some feedback. It's become there's a concept in Drupal development. It's called core gates. Okay, and essentially what that means is that when something is being considered for merge into Drupal, they have to pass through these core gates in order to be merged, right? So there would be like a docs gate or an accessibility gate or a design gate, and it basically code has to be vetted through those different teams before it can go into Drupal core or whatever. And WordPress core in a lot of ways has moved to this stage now where you'll see like these feature projects that people are working on, like shiny updates or whatever, or even the REST API, which I think qualifies as a feature project, has to go through these sorts of core gates now. It has to go through an accessibility review and through a docs review and these sorts of things before it goes in. And that's a great thing, right? Like getting docs to the point where it was considered like missing docs used to just be like the norm in a lot of cases, and it wasn't anybody's fault. It just wasn't anybody's priority. But it took a long time to get core contributors into the mindset that missing docs are a bug, right? Like, and once you get into that mindset, like I made design changes to this web page, and it is not accessible. That means it's not ready for merge now, and that's awesome. Like I like to see more of these contributor teams moving into places of influence within core development. So you have people like Andrea Ferscher, who's a core developer who lives in Italy, and he is sort of the liaison between the accessibility team and the core team now. So it's really amazing to see a core developer spring up who is someone who is active on an underserved team like accessibility. And that's where, I want to talk to these people. I want to introduce these people to the community, because these are people who are largely nameless and faceless. These are, in a lot of cases, they're people who are not well known in the community. And the work that they're doing, I think there's a benefit in exposing the bubble, as it were, to its contributor community, because there's a lot of contributor teams a lot of people don't even know about, or if they know about, they don't really know what they do. I think there would be immense benefit in even just doing like a limited engagement podcast, like one episode on each team. Just find somebody from each team and do 12 episodes for a year or whatever. I think it would be immensely useful to profile each team and what they do, and their responsibilities and where they need help, and sort of giving everyone a great idea of how honestly easy it is to contribute to WordPress if you really want to. But that's the thing, you gotta want it. You gotta want it, because if you don't want it, then we don't want you. But I don't speak for the WordPress project when I say we don't want you, because we actually do.
Well, it's times have been flying by, and
wow, we're already like an hour and a half, almost an hour and a half. Sorry about that.
No problem.
You can just cut out that last rant about the
No, that was the best. I got to make sure people watch to the end. All right. So final two questions. First off, where might people bump into you? Drew, what's on your calendar? Events, meetups of any kind that you might be attending?
Well, this year it's been pretty hard to bump into me because I haven't been traveling at all. So I'm the lead organizer for WordCamp Denver, which is in 2 weeks.
So you might go.
Huh?
So you might go.
Yeah, I might go. I'll probably sleep through it. But which, by the way, I have to give a little plug for WordCamp Denver. We're trying something new this year, which is very exciting. We're trying a new track format for one of our tracks. It's town hall format. So we're doing, like you've been to WordCamp, so they have like town halls with Matt Mullenweg or whatever. We have 6 town halls this year, 6 50-minute Q&A sessions on things like e-commerce, business, development. We have a design critique panel. We have a growth and marketing panel. It's going to be awesome. So that's the plug for WordCamp Denver, 2 weeks from now. And then I'm organizing the WordCamp Contributor Day at WordCamp US in Philadelphia, so you can bump into me in Philadelphia. And then I'm going to go to DC after that, briefly. So you can bump into me in DC, and then I'm going back home again. And you can bump into me in Denver, and I will buy you a beer. If you
Whoa. That's quite an offer to just throw out there. Bonus for anybody
I will buy WordPress people beers almost anytime. But you got to come to Colorado because this is where, craft beer lives.
Oh, man.
Portland, they're just posers. All these other places, they're just posers. You have to come to Colorado to get real beer.
That is a big draw. And a big statement, too.
But yeah, so pretty much WordCamp Denver, WordCamp US.
All right. Right on. And last, who do you recommend that I invite on the show in the future?
Rian Riedfeld, first one. Let's see. Well, I don't know. Do you ever have repeats? Have you had any repeats?
I have never repeated a guest.
I'd have to look because I haven't seen every single episode. I don't even. I mean,
no one has.
How could I possibly know that? Who you haven't already invited?
It's getting long now. This is episode 120, so it's a lot of people.
I would say, that's a hard question because I know a lot of people that have been on the show because I've been watching the show for a long time. You've had Jeff Chandler, right?
Yeah, a long time ago.
And Brian.
Yep.
And
multiple Brians.
Brian Krarsgård.
Yeah.
I think you should get Ryan Himmel.
Okay.
I want answers on WP Quarterly already. I want answers.
All right.
When am I going to get my WP Quarterly? Honestly, I think I would like to see maybe somebody more like in a support role. These are largely the more silent people in our community.
Sure.
People who are not really, in a lot of cases, involved in, like, have you ever had Jan Dembowski on?
No, but that would be great.
Jan would be great. I'm assuming Mika, you've had Mika Epstein, or no?
Actually, no, but I will.
Well, start with Mika.
Yeah.
And Jan and Rian. That would be a good start.
That would be a good start. A great start.
Oh, and another one, John Conchino. He lives in Singapore. He's killing it on the Docs team right now.
Wow.
He's running the Help Hub project, and he's helping run the Theme Developer Handbook project. And he's going to run the Docs team at the WordCamp Contributor Day at WordCamp US. Yeah, John Conchino, Rian Riedfeld, John Dembowski, and Mika Epstein.
Fantastic.
They're done.
Awesome list. So before we wrap up, is there anything you want to share with people? Any parting words of wisdom, any pitches, or just any ways to contact you if someone's so inclined?
You can find me almost everywhere at Drew a Picture. On some jerk stole my Drew a Picture username on Instagram, so it is unfortunately Drew a Picture. And on the Making WordPress Slack, I am just Drew.
Okay.
Not just Drew, but like Drew.
That would get confusing.
That's right. That's it. That's all I got.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Drew, thank you so much. It's been a real honor to get to talk to you for this hour and a half. This has been a fantastic episode. I hope a lot of people tune in. I'm going to share it like crazy. And I wish you a very productive week. And I look forward to seeing you in December.
Yeah, I'll see you then. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Drew.